Good evening. We will now call to order the Chesterfield Township Planning Commission meeting on January 17th, 2023. I will call the roll. Mr. Miller is here. Mr. LaBelle?
Here.
Mr. DeVink?
Here.
Mr. Leonard?
Here.
Mr. Renault?
Here.
Mr. Jaworski? He's excused tonight. Mr. Carr?
Here.
Mr. Klanowski?
Here.
Mr. Brokart?
Here.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. Can everyone please silence their cell phones? Item number 4 is approval of the minutes of prior meetings. I will make a motion to approve the minutes of January 3rd, 2023.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Miller, supported by Mr. LaBelle. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Approval of the agenda. I will make a motion to approve the agenda as submitted. Support. We have a motion by Mr. Miller, supported by Mr. Demink. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Public hearings, there is none tonight. Reviews, our Secretary Rick will begin the items that we can do in a timely manner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Item A is Tidal Wave Auto Spa Site Plan 2022-11. This is a special land use. It's a M2. It's a 9.59 acre site on Gratiot, just north of 23 Mile Road. The applicant has been here a couple of times now. And at our last meeting, there was some concern about the stacking of cars and the flow of traffic in and out of the site. The applicant has since made the adjustments to their drawing, and I'm very happy with it. And Mr. Carr actually was the one who brought this up. The other things that need to be part of my motion this evening is they have the pay kiosks that are underneath the canopy. The canopy is close to the property line. Our ordinance does allow that, so I'd like to make that part of my motion, that we do approve the location of the kiosk canopy. And the second thing as part of my motion is that the applicant, at least in our packets, we didn't receive any kind of cut sheet, designation on the drawing, anything that showed the actual light fixture themselves, the site lighting fixtures. We didn't know if they were pointed up in the air, if they were angled, if they were, a true 90-degree horizontal down, no light going up into the sky. And meeting with the applicant just a moment ago, she does have that information, and our township planner has agreed to accept that administratively. So with that, I'd like to make the motion to approve.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. LaBelle, supported by Mr. Renault. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Item B is Creekside Park Site Plan 2022-03. This is the final review of the site condominium, R1B. It's a 32.2 acre parcel, the northwest corner of Baker Road in Washington. There was still 3 outstanding items that were listed on the Giffords-Webster summary that was given to us on January the 5th. And the township, Mr. Palin, as of this afternoon, did receive a letter explaining and taking care of all the 3 items. That letter was written today on January the 16th, so that was given administratively to the township. Other than that, I'd like to make a motion to approve.
Motion by Mr. LaBelle, supported by Mr. Renault. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Item number 7, comments from the floor as permitted by the commission on non-agenda items. So that means us, right, Jonathan, the board? The general public on non-agenda items? If you want to speak on non-agenda items. Seeing no one. Non-agenda related communications at number 8. Receive and file all comments regarding agenda items. Number 10, committee reports, ordinance amendments, board liaison reports, reviews and discussions from members of the commission, consultants, and township employees. A, cannabis ordinance draft discussion. Ms. Osborne, or do you want to speak it, or just?
I'm going to defer to
Okay.
Ms. Bain.
Okay. Ms. Baum?
Good evening. Included in your communications, your packet was updated memo, based on the memo that we shared with you last month, that walked through some of the background and considerations that the Planning Commission may wish to undertake as part of drafting a zoning ordinance language that will accompany licensing language, which is a separate code that will go in tandem to the Township Board. Included in there as well is a rough draft of what an ordinance might look like, generally following along with the outline that was presented in that memo, the cover memo, including definitions for the different uses and terms that are used in the ordinance, as well as some basic regulation, trying to keep it somewhat simple and straightforward, while still hitting on, I think, the main highlights of things that had been brought up over the last meeting and perhaps the meeting previously, back in December, I think is when that one was. So with that, that was just pretty much the introduction. I think some of the things that we were hoping to get from the Planning Commission this evening include some conversation about the districts in which these uses would be permitted. Right now, the draft has everything in the M1, in Light Industrial District. Is that the only district in which we would allow these kinds of facilities? Is there any consideration to considering certain uses that might be similar to other certain uses, perhaps in other districts? Whether that would be permitted uses or special land uses. And I think that's primarily, probably one of the top things that should be discussed, and the pros and cons of that, and then moving forward on then what other kinds of standards are important to the Planning Commission with respect to the other things that we highlighted, including safety, trash, parking, hazardous materials, hours of operation, signage, lighting, building design, and fencing, screening, and landscaping. So kind of hitting those highlights, but I think really focusing first your primarily discussion on the location, the districts in which these uses would be permitted.
Thank you. So you want us to go to each individual commissioner and have them give ideas?
That seems like a good
Okay.
place to start.
Mr. Klinowski, you have any comments?
There we go. I think light industrial would be a good spot for it. I think we should use a special land use on these units. The hours of operation, 9 to 9 or 9 to 10, someplace in that range. They should be standalone buildings, in my opinion. And I guess the one, I've seen some communities where they have boarded up windows. I've seen a lot of them with colored windows, and the boarded up places look kind of bad. So that's it for right now, for me.
Mr. Leonard?
Yes, I agree with Jim on what he said there. The M1, I think, gives us the flexibility to allow one of the three types of businesses. They can grow and process, they can grow, process, and sell. And I think we can accomplish all of that in that area. I think the impact is minimal to the M1 district. And basically, I don't have a whole lot more to say than that right now, but I just think that having it spread out all over the township is not necessarily where I would like to see it. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. LaBelle?
Well, I've got lots of comments on different items, but to start off with the M1 district, here's my thought. I do agree with my two other board members that that is probably the best place to have that. Here's one of the reasons is I was quite amazed at how technical the growing facilities are. How they have to maintain a specific temperature, specific humidity, the lighting, rodent control, cleanliness. It was mind-blowing how technical and how incredibly precise this industry is. But if we had, for instance, say, if we were in a different district, and I know that that these grow facilities, if they lose power, they have to have backup generation. And because of the amount of lighting and the draw on the system, there on the DTE grid there is, they have to have large generation. There's a lot of noise there. It's big industrial equipment. Even the sorting and preparing it, they have to have backup equipment. And to put that in a retail environment, in anything other than an M1 district, it just, to me, doesn't make any sense. As we get into the weeds, Jill, I'd like to continue on with my other items, but that's my reasoning for the M1 at this time.
Thank you. Mr. Demink?
I'll defer everything to the other planning commission members at this time.
Thank you. Mr. Brokart?
I'm not certain about the districting yet. What I want to do is I want to go through the township charter and understand that better. I'm not saying this hasn't been voted in. It certainly has been voted in. But Chesterfield Township has a certain definition, has a certain identity. And I don't want cannabis or any item to define who we are. We are who we are already. This should be a part of who we are, and it should not define us. We should define it. And that's what I'm trying to search for right now. So I'm not sure how it should be zoned yet, but I want to make sure whatever we do, we're consistent with the charter for Chesterfield Township. That's what the people want us to do, and that's what we need to do. So I'll look a little more deeply into that. Maybe M1 is correct. I'm not sure yet. But I'll go through the charter and make sure that this fits into it rather than us being defined by it. That's all I have for today.
Thank you. Mr. Renault?
I really have nothing additional at this point. I think other than I think the M1 district is the appropriate district to put these companies in. And other than that, I think everything else has been well stated already. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Carr?
Yeah, I mean, overall, I thought the first draft was, pretty comprehensive, and I thought pretty well done. The only areas that I myself want to look a little further into is just the general appearance of them. I didn't have an issue with any of the standoff distances, and the M1, I think we've all been pretty consistent on that. But mostly just want to look at the appearances of the buildings, the security of the buildings, and then the overall site appearance and aesthetics and how it fits into the community. So those are my biggest areas that I want to do a little further research on, but I think the definitions that are in there, I thought, I didn't see any issues or anything that jumped out at me that is any concern. I think it's going to be difficult to go anywhere other than M1, because if you start getting into commercial spaces now, most of our commercial spaces are next to residential areas, and I think that opens a big can of issues that would be really restrictive. So that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it also should be in an M1 district, but I also think that there should be 1,000 feet between each establishment, and parking is huge, because the few that we visited, they didn't have nearly enough parking. They had over 20 employees in the retail shop, and they didn't even have 20 parking spaces for the help or the customers, so that's got to be looked at too. So that's what my thoughts are. If nobody else has anything else to discuss, we're going to open it up to the public. We're going to give 3 minutes. In M1 district only, 3 minutes. Yep.
Hello, my name is David, 50093 Gratiot. I think you guys should really consider this, the C1 districts and stuff like that, because C4, you're very right about the lights and electricity and the smell. Grows should definitely belong exactly in M1. They have light traffic and just employees going back and forth, but when you're talking about retail fronts, like beautiful establishment retail fronts, they have a better chance, C3, they're in the front. It's even safer for us because if something happens, even the local police department, when you're a business, they ask you to keep your windows clear so they can see through, just in case. It's a recommendation from them. Something that has like Gratiot has 2 lanes, intersections, easy to pull off from, pull out from. The industrial places, they can get a lot of traffic, and you guys have a lot of thriving industrials back there. They have all their employees, their trucks going back and forth. You don't need the public back there, going back and forth. They can cause a lot of traffic. Also like you guys are saying, the smell of electricity, that's a big factor too. Loud noises, definitely got to be back there, but also there's a lot of residential back there. I think that C3 for retail would be best. It brings in a lot of money for Chesterfield. A lot of people come in, they see it. You don't got to go through, factories. And most of these factories have enough parking for their employees, and that's about it. Over there, imagine opening a retail and a grow. You need employees, you need parking for the customers. What's going to happen? They're going to start parking in other people's parking lot on the street, on this and this and this. You need something clean. You need something C3 with a lot of parking, a lot of lighting, a lot of security, good landscaping, exits. I know a lot of these dispensaries have, you walk in from one door, you exit from the same door. That's a fire hazard. You get busy, something happens, robberies, whatever, fire, everyone's running out through that one door. You really need an entrance to reception, into the room, and then an exit from the bud room to leave. One flow traffic. So just to keep, everything safe. But I definitely recommend M1 for grows, and definitely C3 and C4 for retail, if you guys consider that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I want to thank you for actually taking, I'm sorry, Stavros Toma, 47677 Malonis Drive, Shelby Township. I want to thank you for actually taking the time and looking into this ordinance, and actually, some of you have had I've had the pleasure of giving you guys some tours of my facilities and see how my facilities operate. I will say I do agree with you that industrial is the best zone for these uses, for this use especially. I personally have 2 stores, one in Centerline and one in Oxford. They're both in industrial zones, and it works out perfect. As long as the business is responsible enough to, get a piece of land with enough parking, you'll be fine. You just got to make sure you have the parking. What I would suggest is maybe, doing M1, M2, and have the same parking requirements that you would require for retail. That's what the Village of Oxford did, and that worked. So you could open a store in industrial, but you got to have the same parking requirements as a regular retail shopping center or freestanding building would have. I'd also like to suggest, measuring from building to building instead of building to property line. Property lines can change, building locations can't. You'll notice that, some of these cannabis guys get cannabis guys get clever with the property lines and buy property and move property lines and all that stuff. Building to building eliminates all of that. I also noticed that M2 was not included in the ordinance. I thought that maybe just be an oversight from the board or from the planner, but M2 works as well. There is enough M2 along Gratiot where you can still have retail along Gratiot next to other retail sites. The last thing is the distance between dispensaries could potentially bring an issue to the township. What happens is it becomes to be, it's a race to get their application in. So you see what happened in Mount Clemens, people were camping out outside of the city hall, and eventually Mount Clemens got panicked, they rescinded the ordinance, and someone filed a lawsuit. Having a buffer between dispensaries is just gonna create issues. Like I said, I challenge you guys to go out the center line, get dispensaries right next to each other. You'll see Jars, Levels, House of Dink, they're all just right next to each other, and everything works out just fine, no issues. Yeah, I think that's all I got for you guys. But I would, like I said, 1,000 feet is a long way. I urge you guys maybe take your golf range finder and see how long 1,000 feet really is. It's a long ways. So that's a good starting point you guys have there on some of the buffers. I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening, Paul Weisberger. I echo much of Mr. Toma's comments, almost every one of them. One thing I'd keep in mind, everybody has the right to speak, and I'm not immune to this, but a lot of the comments you're going to hear from everybody is it's self-serving. And we got to keep in mind that we're looking at zoning concepts and where is the best place to go. So some of the comments you're going to hear might even be illogical as to where they should go, but they're crafted to make it sound like it's a zoning concept. So the movement we've been seeing over the years just from meeting with people, and even the draft is M1. What's confusing to me is that M1, in the hierarchy of the way zoning normally goes, is M1 has lighter industrial uses, M2 has more intense uses, and M3 you can have a smelting factory and a tanning operation, right? Back in the old days. And so I don't understand the logic and why you could have these in M1. And let's be honest, cannabis, until everybody gets comfortable with it in the community and maybe expands it to C3 and C2 and C1, it looks like everybody kind of wants to take baby steps. And a lot of communities are following going industrial first. And then when you realize there aren't gunshots and prostitution and drug problems out in front of them, they're just businesses, they kind of open up, and you're seeing communities open up to more locations. But the way your ordinance is normally drafted, and I just recently read it in terms of the M2, is any use in M1 is permitted in M2. But if you're putting this in a regulatory ordinance, or there's components of this that go there, or if you specifically narrow it to just M1, it doesn't really follow the concepts of what your zoning ordinance normally does in terms of hierarchy of intensity. So if M1's allowed, either through interpretation from city attorney or otherwise, I'd like to know if M2 would also be permitted, and therefore by extension, if you have, I don't think you have an M3, but maybe you do, it should be allowed in M3. And I do echo very much the concerns about having a distance requirement between locations. If I knew for sure we weren't going to have one near the one we're looking at, I'd probably in a self-serving manner say we absolutely should have distance requirements. But the reality is you have banks, gas stations, party stores in a capitalist free market that compete with each other right next to each other. If you look at the Austin, Texas method for bars, or even Royal Oak, you cluster them. And there are many communities such as Muskegon and Centerline and others where they all are in one industrial area, and that's where they're pocketed. And so I would be in favor of M1 and clearing up that M2 is allowed, not just by interpreting the ordinance where it says all uses in M1 are permitted in M2, but specifically stating it so there's no confusion down the road. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Good evening, Gary Ginnernelik. I do have a written summary because I read the memo and the proposed ordinance, so my summary is somewhat of a critique of that. And if you don't mind, may I pass it out?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Just, Gary, just give them to Jonathan. He can pass them down.
I think with reference to the grows and the processing, it should be an M1. But the retail, if it's retail, you have retail every other place in the commercial districts, in your township, and in the ordinance. In the critique, there was a comment about where the downtown was. I wondered where the, excuse me, the downtown was in Chesterfield. That might have been an oversight. But some of the things that are in the draft of the comments and in the ordinance seems to be an over-regulation of this proposed type of business. You don't regulate banks, gas stations, party stores, things of that nature to the extent that it says in this proposed ordinance. And with reference to the security issue, I believe the state of Michigan has exclusive jurisdiction over that. They have specific regulations that the retailers have to follow with reference to security, cameras, and things of that nature. So should Chesterfield Township be in that realm of this type of business when the state's already in it? The one comment was it should be in a freestanding building, but there's places where they're not always in freestanding buildings. Commercial districts in Chesterfield and in a lot of communities, you have strip malls with multiple facilities of a commercial nature in the same strip mall or in the same mall. So I think from my perspective as a lawyer and also living here, I'd appreciate it if you'd read this in conjunction with the draft and make appropriate modifications. Now, there's always discussion as to distancing between facilities. Well, if you have a grow or a processing and you're all in the 22-mile and railroad track industrial park or the park where the police station is, you can't be in North Bay, or you can be in North Bay, but you can't be in the industrial park across from Rosie O'Grady's because that was a, quote, high-tech industrial park by way of a consent judgment from decades ago, and from time to time that's been amended. So you're precluding that area. So I'd ask you to read it and keep an open mind as to those provisions. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Chris Aiello. I live on Compass Point in Chesterfield Township, and I'm in the business, and I've had an opportunity to discuss this with you at the Joint Planning Commission meeting. So this trip started 2 years ago, and I was a little shocked when I seen this memo that came out because the Planning Commission has not met yet. 2 years ago, there was 7 maps that were put out that were designed from the very beginning after interviewing like 24 different meetings with a supervisor and police chief and fire chief, and every type of individual that was in the business came and spoke and set forth their parameters. And then to appear here tonight to hear that each and every one of you is, we're all done. The Planning Commission is all done, and read the memo and read the rough draft. It's M1 and it's 1,000 feet from homes. And so it's just contrary to everything that was a finding of fact for 2 years. 2 years, findings of fact went on. And so you roll into this in 1 month and it's M1, and it's as restrictive on the zoning as it can be, and as restrictive as 1,000 feet. And so I know that some of you have had the opportunity to go to stores. So if you went to Puff and Utica, they're 25 feet from a house. If you go to Centerline, they're 75 feet from a house. If you go to East Point, they just enacted there and awarded licenses, and they're 100 feet from homes. But I come out to Chesterfield, and we want 1,000 feet from homes when the public said, 56% said, yes, we want marijuana. And so I'm not sure where that came from, that now we have to be 1,000 feet from home when 6% of the residents, some of your neighbors and mine, said, yes, we want this here, and let's get it on. And so why are you trying to buffer out Gratiot and all the areas that are retail? These are retail stores. I can't understand why you'd want to hide them. Second problem up and down Gratiot is half of Gratiot is M1 and half of Gratiot is C3. So there are 3 or 4 bars on Gratiot that are a mix of M1s and MC3s. So which one is a better site location? The one that's 3 blocks away from it that just happens to be historically C3 and versus another one that's historically M1? So either there was an intent to exclude, which makes the zoning ordinance reasonably unpractical, or it just doesn't make sense. Like, how did you all get to this point I mean, you're all intelligent people. How did we get to this point? They're called retail stores by statute. Under MRTMA, it's a retail store. You go in and you purchase your product and you leave, just like a pharmacy. And so now to sit here, it is rather disingenuous to say that it should be in an M1 versus it shouldn't be in an area where all your moms and your kids go shopping. So you want to send all your moms and all your kids into M1 zoning districts to do the shopping? I recommend that please take your time. Let's discuss this at a next meeting. We're way off on what everybody in the entire state of Michigan does. But thank you.
Hi, I'm Andrea Page. I live on 27065 Telstar. I live right next to a C3. It is the corner of Gratiot and Telstar. So yes, I fully support the 1,000 feet away from residential. Absolutely. I have kids also. My main concern is smell. So if we are doing manufacturing, yes, those absolutely have to be next to the M1. But please take into consideration the ones that when I bought the property, it was zoned to be a Brightside Dental, and plans were submitted to the board. And now all of a sudden things are changing, and I have the potential to be right next to a marijuana facility. Yes, I fully support the 1,000 feet, and just take into consideration the residents that do live next to residential. That's all I ask.
Anybody else?
Hello, I'm Peter Viviano Flower Shops on Gratiot. My residence is in Clinton Township. Part of the conversation that's been missed is that the ballot initiative passed was for unlimited retail, unlimited grow, unlimited processing, etc. And so I could understand and respect why the board wants to do M1 and M2. It's a way that they can control the number. And it's fair. And it's equitable. I also want to remind everybody that the state statute that was passed has all of the required ordinances listed in it and the setbacks. And the state says to the city that they can't be more restrictive than those limits. I think the board, from what they presented, was practical. I think that that setbacks were reasonable. And I think that it should be limited to M1 and M2. I'd like to thank the board for the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Just press the button here, or is it ready to go? It is on. How about that? John Johnson. I live on Shady Glen here in Chesterfield Township. My family lives here. And I was the person that was responsible for creating the petition drive and circulating petitions and gathering the signatures and running the informational drive to get this on the ballot and get it passed. So I wanted to address a couple of things. There seems to be this concern about the manufacturing aspect. There will be no growers coming to Chesterfield Township at this point in time. You can count on that. Anybody want to take a bet on that? I'm your guy. So that is not going to happen. There's just an overabundance of grow facilities in the state of Michigan. Many of them are crashing right now. They won't be coming here. So your major concern really is going to be the retail stores in all of this. Maybe somebody might look at processing or transport, but highly unlikely at this point with the industry. So, but I wanted to remind everybody that the petition drive and the petition language and the ordinance attached to it stated unlimited. And so whatever it is that you all finally decide on in your infinite wisdom, and I respect all of you for your volunteer work and the job that you're doing in trying to protect our community, but you can't limit it so much so that it can't be anywhere. And so there will be zoning issues that will regulate this to some degree, and then setbacks attached to it. So whatever plan it is that you finally come up with, you need to take and look at the zoning and the setbacks at a map when using your consultants and determine if there really is any locations that might be available once you're done with whatever the exercise is that you go through. And so I can assure you that it won't be unlimited, though, no matter what you do. If you made it a free-for-all and you invited everybody to town, you know, these guys are business folks just like everybody else. They're going to take a look when the applications come in, and if there's 100 applications or many individuals that might be approved, they're going to walk away from this and say, too much competition, it doesn't make any sense, I don't want to be there and I don't want to be part of that. And so, you know, free market forces will come into play ultimately, and there may be such that whatever it is that you approve, there's an overabundance of these facilities, but free market forces at the end of the day will determine which of them survive and which of them go out of business. And this community can only sustain so much, and those forces will come to bear ultimately in regard to all this. So I'll remind you that the voters of this township voted, maybe not overwhelmingly, but substantially in favor of unlimited, and it means what it says. And we, the Friends of Chesterfield Township, intend to hold this body accountable for what they do here, and it can't be that it's so limited that it can't be anywhere. So I respect your opinion and your hard work, and I hope you keep that in mind as you proceed. But my view is it should be anywhere that it's reasonably feasible in any zoning, but particularly I live here in the township, I like M1 and M2. But there is, Mr. Aiello suggested there are places along the corridor in the C that might serve as well. So thank you very much. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you. Ms. Baum, what is our next step?
Is there any other discussion the planning commissioners want to have this evening on this?
Any other discussions, Mr. Klinowski?
Yes, you know, the point was made that this should be handled just as any other retail establishment, and it's not. The state highly regulates this. It have state regulations, so the state doesn't recognize it as a retail. In fact, you can't put it in residential, where retail can be mixed use in residential. So that's one point. Generally, you don't need the exposure in this area because you have in retail, because a lot of it is on the internet. They have websites. That's where the people locate these entities, these businesses. So it's a little different than standard retail again. Let's see, the other points here. Oh, well, we haven't discussed air filtration. I've noticed some facilities have a lot, especially the production areas, the manufacturers. Some really have a lot of odor to it. Some do not, and I think that's in the air filtration. And I wonder, do we have like light standards for, you know, trespass light? You have is there anything that for odor? I mean, there's no detection, I don't think, or any. Is there anything that you can use for that in our ordinances?
Yeah, so we do have a section about odor on page, I think, 9, in letter I, under 6, general requirements. And that talks about air contaminants, dust, fume, gas, mist, odor, smoke, vapor, or combination thereof. And then some standards to ensure that those are in compliance.
Can we add into our ordinance a particular type of filtration system, or
I think specifying the actual system may be risky just because technology changes so quickly. And to have an amendment to come through every 6 months as new things become available. I think just telling the operator what you want them to do, that it has to be controlled. You can certainly provide guidelines as a separate document if you find that there's certain things that you like that you want to see, but as long as they can meet the standards of the ordinance, that should be sufficient.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Leonard?
I'm all set for now, thank you.
Mr. LaBelle?
How far do you want to go with this? Well, I'd like to go back to the M1, one more comment. There's been comments on the floor about allowing it in the commercial district. There was one facility that I did visit, and it was a retail facility. It was a new building. It was constructed for this industry. But when we were standing in the parking lot, there was a few of us that were there. The odor was outside in a retail facility. There was quite a bit of odor outside, and for us to have that in a strip mall, in a retail atmosphere, I don't think that that's what we want to have. You know, it needs to be in my opinion, again, a standalone building, a conforming building. You know, we talked about the M1 district. As we continue on writing this ordinance, my opinion is that we need to, again, when we write the ordinance for this special entity, we utilize what we know from the retail aspect for parking. There was one of the facilities that I did visit again, and I was told by others that there's times when there's cars stacked in the street to get into this retail store, a new store, and we can't allow that. So when that ordinance is being written, our final ordinance is being written, we need to consider the M1 with the retail requirements for parking, as well as the lighting levels for the retail parking, for the retail parking lots, so that we have sufficient security in that parking lot. A number of the facilities that I did visit, they had security guards on the outside of the building. They had security guards in the parking lot. So I do feel it is it's a very secure place to visit. For now, I think, Mr. Chairman, I think I'd like to stop there. I'm sure that there's going to be more things as Jill goes on with her narrative as to what needs to be added to.
Thank you. Mr. DeMink, anything?
I'm good.
Mr. Brokart?
I'm okay for now.
Mr. Renault?
Yeah, I'm set for the moment, thank you.
Mr. Carr?
I am set as well. I'm good right now.
Okay. I have nothing else either, so.
Sorry? I wondered if there was additional information that you would like from us, either in the language or supporting information that would help you all with your deliberations.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a comment. You know, in my comments that I had given to you and to Jonathan, there was a couple of things that I think that I've crossed the line when it comes to licensing. So at this point, where should we separate our comments as relates to licensing to our legal counsel? For instance, Mr. Siebert, in my comments, I talked about exterior signage containing, as we all know, as it's been pounded into us, is that we can't comment on, when we talk about signage, we can't talk about content. But from what I've read and from what I understand, the state of Michigan does allow, in this industry, to comment on what can be put on signage.
Yeah, there's a provision in the statute which allows the ordinance to put what the statute calls reasonable sign regulations. The difficulty is that there have been no cases that have gone to the Court of Appeals, which are the only ones that matter, which has interpreted any of the zoning ordinance regulations. There have been some cases that have made it to the Court of Appeals, but they don't address these sort of mundane issues in the zoning ordinance. Cases that are hanging around the circuit courts don't matter. They only bind those parties, and they're of no really any significance. But the fact that the statute calls out the local unit's ability to regulate signage is significant. So you have that right. How far you regulate it and when you cross the line, well, we'd have to see the specifics of it. The regulations that I think you're talking about are the ones that really have been handed down from the U.S. Supreme Court, that when a local unit starts regulating the content of a sign, that then you start getting into First Amendment issues. And a lot of ordinances are frail in this state and others because many of them contain content-based regulations. But in these particular cases, you could regulate sign, the size of the sign. It also talks about what are called time, place, and manner restrictions, which are also reasonable. So, we'd have to see the specifics of it. You couldn't very well put in a sign regulation so that if you drove by the facility, you had no idea what it was. That would be, in my view, unreasonable. So you have to give the owner of the facility the ability to at least market the facility. But on the other hand, you could put size, restrictions on it, lighting of the sign restrictions on it, digital, however you're going to do it. You could look at those sorts of things. But there's a certain point at which, if you're too restrictive and you can't tell what it is, and essentially you render the signs a nullity. So you got to look at what the specifics are going to be. But this particular ordinance that was approved by the voters in Michigan gives you the right to put reasonable sign regulations. When it crosses the line, we'll have to see.
And I gave some examples of wordage in my, in my simple narrative that I passed on to Jonathan, and I don't know, certainly consideration is that we would, and if we can, restrict the words that are used, no Maui Wowie or weed or something that, that I'm a product of the 70s, that, might be offensive to others.
You have to be careful when you get into the discretion, because ultimately, somebody's going to, when this is all done with, you've got the zoning ordinance in place, the township board's going to take a look at the licensing through the regulatory ordinance, and then there's going to be a licensing scheme. And so somebody's going to come in, they're going to fill out an application, they're going to submit it to the clerk's office, and if they meet the zoning ordinance requirements, let's assume it ends up in an M1. They meet the M1, they meet the size requirements, they meet the setback requirements, and they come in with a sign, somebody's going to have to make a determination as to whether or not that sign meets the ordinance. And it's going to be difficult to define in the zoning ordinance a sign that would not be necessarily which you would think in the township's best interests, but somebody else may think, I don't see a problem with it at all. You can't leave it to the discretion of the building administrator, the zoning administrator. Those are dead on arrival. Anytime you leave, there's so much discretion to the township employee that's overseeing the program, those are dead. So it's got to be sufficiently defined so that every individual that fills out that application reasonably understands what they can put on the sign, and just somebody sitting in the building department or zoning department making that call, it's not going to make it.
Okay, that was one of the things that I had.
Rick, can I just do one follow-up real quick?
Oh, sure.
So basically, you're saying our sign ordinance, the way it stands right now, will be the same for the cannabis dealers or the cannabis things as then for any other business?
I'm saying that your sign ordinance, you could apply it to these, and you could treat it like any other business.
Size, wording,
Yeah.
square feet,
But-
how many they can have.
Yeah, except
But the
that-
wording, I understand what
But
you're
except
looking
that there is a specific provision in the statute that deals with recreational marijuana that goes out of its way to say that you can regulate and place reasonable restrictions on signs. They didn't have to say that. That's implicit anyway. Anytime you zone, you can put restrictions on signs. I read that as saying they're giving you some extra additional ability to regulate. How far that goes, we'd have to see what the language is. The facts matter and the language matters. So I I'd have to see what kind of restriction you want to put on it. I know what you're talking about, but that's going to be difficult to write.
Agreed.
You know, if we can,
And
you
that's
know.
why you're here.
No, I understand that, but when they say offensive language,
Right.
what may be offensive to you may not be offensive to me, you know.
Agreed. Back to the licensing, you know, a couple of the things that I had, that I'd written in my narrative, and actually there's a gentleman that I spoke to, he's in the audience this evening. He talked about, and it was actually a good idea, about limiting the application period to a very specific time of the year. And again, I don't know if we can do that or not, as an example, January 1st to February 1st. This is when you can apply in Chesterfield Township for a license to operate in our township.
That will be a consideration that the township board will make in the regulatory ordinance. The
So
licensing.
that's not this board's responsibility?
No, you're here to decide land use.
Right.
Where it goes and when it's in the right zone, what the configurations of the parcel are, and what the interaction between the surrounding land uses are. With respect to how much the application fee is going to be, what the window is for the applications, those sorts of things are going to have to be sorted out by the board in the regulatory ordinance. You know, revocation of a license, renewal of a license, suspension of a license, those sorts of things will be in the regulatory ordinance.
Okay. Well, my first item on my list is that all shipping and receiving will be done through a separate and secure door. In my opinion, I don't like the idea of, there's obviously armored car professionals that know how to handle the amount of cash that goes in and out of these facilities. But to have bulk product brought through the front door of a building and possibly jeopardizing the well-being of a customer, I think that we should put in our ordinance that they have to have a separate door, a separate entrance to facilitate that activity. The next one, again, will be a license regulatory. I won't even bring it up. Exterior lighting, we talked about. Another thing that I would like to see added to our ordinance is the proper storage and the separation of product from the general public. And I don't know if we can do this or not, but legally do this is, I'd like to see that if they can have the bulk material, the bulk amounts of it, in a separate locked room behind the scenes, behind a wall in the back of the building, and then have limited amount on the sales floor in a locked case or behind a counter so that the general public can't reach and grab something and make their way out the door. And I don't know if that would even be our responsibility at this point to write that in the ordinance, but I think that we, at the very least, need to have a provision in our ordinance that makes it that this material has to be locked up, the bulk material, the majority of it, has to be locked in a separate area in the building. Something else that I'd mentioned to Jill prior to our meeting is to put more in the ordinance for rodent control, insect control, things of that nature. This, in my opinion, is almost a food facility where we need to regulate, make sure that there's screening so that bugs can't get into these areas. We can't get mice and rats from the outside, things like that, getting into the building. So I think that extra attention needs to be put toward that. And the last thing that I'd like to bring up is currently in our township ordinances, we don't allow bumper blocks. We don't allow bollards to surround a building, things of that nature. We allow bollards to protect critical equipment, transformers, water meters, gas meters, things of that nature. But in some of the facilities that we had the opportunity to visit, they had one of the facilities had bollards, every 4 or 5 feet around the circumference of the building. Another facility had these bumper blocks that were made out of concrete that I would expect to see over at Selfridge, at the entrance of Selfridge. They were very large, and it prohibits a car from crashing through the wall and getting into the facility. I think that we need to consider something along those lines at these entities, which again brings me back to another argument, another statement that the industrial area is more suited for that kind of security rather than a commercial atmosphere. With that, Mr. Chairman, that's all my comments.
Thank you. Mr. DePink, anything?
I'm fine with what the other commission members have said, and I'm just listening to what you guys want. Thank you.
Mr. Burkhart?
I'm okay, thank you.
Mr. Renault?
We've covered all my concerns.
Mr. Carr?
No, nothing new tonight.
I have nothing else either.
Mr. Chairman, could I?
Yes.
I'm going to assume that, like drive-throughs, because some of the facilities do have it, would that just be like things that we now have in our ordinance would cover the drive-throughs?
You did. They prohibited it in there.
Sorry. We did prohibit drive-throughs
Okay.
in this ordinance.
Okay.
Back to you, Joe.
Yeah, one of the other things, and it came up really right at the beginning, the question or the comment about permitting these as a special land use or through a special land use versus having them be permitted by right. I think that's a conversation that we should have, given the limited districts in which it sounds like you're interested in permitting them, and with all the standards in place, should then the uses just be permitted by right, rather than have to go through a separate process with public hearings for each one of them. And I guess thinking down the road then from that, what additional standards would you put on one use, given its location, that we haven't thought of already in here? And so then, is that necessary?
Anything else from anybody? If not, I guess you'll put something together for us and we
I
can look
think
at
the
it?
way we presented it was they would be permitted by right and not have to go through the special land use process.
Okay, thank you.
What, one comment, one question? Now, don't we require, if there is a drive-through, that would fall under the special land use?
But we're saying that there wouldn't be a drive-through with this use.
They're not going to be allowed, Jim.
Oh, they're not going to be allowed?
Correct.
Oh, okay, okay,
Okay,
very
thank you. Jonathan, do you have anything?
I guess the last thing I guess I would ask are if everyone has gone through the distance separation. And then we heard the one comment about 1,000 feet from another facility. The ordinance right now, as it's drafted, says 200 feet. And I think about 300 to 400 feet would be like a block length. So if you think about that in comparison of 1,000 feet, is there sufficient reasons to extend that to 1,000 feet of another facility, keep it at 200, or the other option would be to eliminate it altogether?
I would actually like to see it 1,000 feet from any other business and the residential area.
That's
1,000
already in
feet.
there, right?
And I thought this was just the first discussion. I mean, you're asking questions that, so I assume we have more time to go back and keep.
We do.
Okay, I just want to make sure, because you're asking questions that you need like final decisions or something.
No, not for final decisions.
Okay,
Just
'cause-
to help me, help us on our
Yeah.
team evaluate
Okay.
if there are significant things that you all agree on that either are or aren't in this ordinance, that we would want to have an
gotcha.
opportunity to tweak some of those things. We still, I think,
Yeah.
want to review them in conjunction with your comments this evening. Give you a map, I think that would help maybe illustrate where we're talking about. And then also be looking to see some of the standards that we've included. If we're being specific with one district, wanting to really make sure that, that if there's things in here that we're asking of these uses, whether they are things that we should be asking of other uses in those districts, or vice versa. If there's things that we're asking for in those districts that we haven't noticed yet. So really kind of honing in on the M1 district and just comparing our uses and making sure that our standards are fairly consistent.
Yeah, I just want to make sure, because I read everything, and then
Yeah.
I knew we were gonna have a conversation, and then, keep working it.
We've got time.
All right,
Right, I
thanks.
mean, we're not gonna drag this out, but certainly, it's a lot to throw at you, especially for people who are just learning about it. I think trying to move it along in the process, but not asking you at this point to set a public hearing yet.
Okay, thank you. How long before, okay, Mr. Palin?
Sorry, Paul. I just want to let everyone know that the State Cannabis Regulatory Agency is holding their first statewide municipal summit. That's on January the 30th on Zoom. So if anyone's interested in attending that, let me know by Thursday and we can get you signed up for it. Yeah, it's from 10 a.m. till noon on the 30th.
Thank you. If not, I'll make a motion to adjourn. We have a motion by Mr. Miller, supported by Mr. Renault. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes